Welcome everybody to this very special Normalprat live, Normal Talk live X Chem friendly, cannabis, mental and sexual health. My name is André Nilsen. I'm the board of Normal Norge, and I will not be taking us through this evening. I will now give the word to Andrés, leader of Chemfriendly Norge, Norway. Thank you, Andrés.
Thank you, André. Yes, so my name is Andrés Lekanger. I'm the chairman of the board of Chemfriendly Norway. We are a user and interest organization for queer and sex workers who do illegal drugs. And in addition to queer people with or without drug user experience, we also consist of professionals such as social workers and nurses, and we cooperate with doctors and scientists on sexualized drug use and drug use among queer people. So we believe that if you're queer, you have a relationship with drugs, both legal and illegal, either yourself or somebody you know. So Chemfriendly is not afraid to teach our target groups how to do drugs in risk-reducing ways, because we know that queers are going to be exposed to drugs sometime or another. And when you are exposed to a drug, it's better to know what is it that you're saying yes or no to. So we work very well with queer nightlife, queer artists, and participate in queer nightclubs and talk about safer drug use with nightlife guests. And we look forward to Oslo Pride and its Queer Night, which is the biggest Pride party. There we will be standing and handing out user equipment to the queer nightlife guests. And that is the best opportunity to talk risk reduction. So we have a website, Facebook page, Instagram account, and on the queer network internet site gayse.no, we have our own group. And here we publish articles on drugs, sexual and mental health, including 2 great articles written by you, André Nilsen, one about cannabis and mental health, and one about cannabis, eroticism, and pleasure. So we're very grateful to be cooperating with you, Normal, and we also cooperate with Sjekkpunkt, but unfortunately, Lucas, who are supposed to be here today, cannot join us because of some personal issues, and that which is sad because Sjekkpunkt represent queer migrants and other multicultural queers. And when it comes to mental health and self-medication on drugs, queer migrants face their own set of challenges that majority queers do not face in the same way. When we're talking about cannabis and sexuality, we're also going to talk about, well, we don't want to be mansplaining, so we're very glad that Esther Nafstad from Normal has said yes to also be participating in that conversation. But we also cooperate with Helseutvalget, and Sondre is here today. And before we start our talk, Sondre will have a few minutes to tell our viewers about Helseutvalgets Arena and Sjekkpunkt project. So Sondre, take it away, and then after Sondre has presented Helseutvalget, me, Esther, and André will start talking.
Okay, my name is Sondre, and I am working in a foundation called Helseutvalget. We work with, to better sexual and psychological health among the queer population in Norway. And I will present 2 of the projects we have. One of them is Sjekkpunkt or Checkpoint, which is testing service we have for men who have sex with men, transgender people, migrants, and also sex workers, where they can take a rapid test anonymously and free for HIV and syphilis, and where they also can come and take tests for gonorrhea and chlamydia. So we are testing, we have open nearly the whole week, and we're also testing at saunas, gay clubs, hotels in other cities than Oslo, on cruising areas, and different places. And we also have Arena, which is a drug prevention project where we go and work outreach on different queer areas, bars, clubs, and prides as well, and we talk to people about alcohol and other drugs. We have these lifestyle tests we take that people can answer different questions regarding sexual health, psychological health, drugs, alcohol use, and then they will get a result which is green, yellow, or red that says something about the risk regarding those teens. So, and that's like we use that test as a invitation for a dialogue for the people who wants to like now know why do I get red risk and what is the reason for that, and then we have a dialogue that so they can like be aware of what risk they're putting themselves out to, and to have to talk with people about those things. So that's us. We have several other projects as well, but this is most suitable for this meeting. Thank you.
Thank you, Sondre. It's important for Chemfriendly to cooperate with Helsedirektoratet because fighting sexually transmitted infections like HIV, hepatitis C is an important issue also for queer drug users mixing drugs and sex. And I also want to point out to all our heterosexual listeners that queers are very good when it comes to cooperating between organizations such as Chemfriendly and Helsedirektoratet and the queer bars. And we want straight people to follow suit. Like I'm looking forward to the day when Normal can stay at the villa in Oslo and share out user equipment and talk to the mostly straight about drug use. So, cannabis and mental health. In living condition surveys, queer people on average rate poorer quality of life and poorer mental health compared to the majority. And bisexuals and trans people rate even poorer life quality and less mental health compared to gays and lesbians, with 1 in 3 trans people having tried to take their life and 36% considered taking their own life. So, André, among Chemfriendly's target groups, you'll find many people that are struggling with mental health issues. And we know queer people on average also tend to do more drugs than the majority population. So you write in your article that 1 in 10 that tries cannabis develops addiction, and that most users use cannabis sporadically. And among the small group of users that use cannabis regularly, quite a few state that they use cannabis for medical purposes. So can you please, what can you tell me about this group? What reasons do users state for self-medicalizing on cannabis?
Well, the most common reasons are conditions like anxiety, depression, PTSD, and also quite a few state that cannabis use help those with ADHD. So those are the most common conditions that people state that they're using cannabis to self-medicate. Also, among physical conditions, chronic pain conditions are also very common.
All right. So, how does cannabis? Why do we think that cannabis can help as a self-medication? What is the function? What happens in the body that helps with these diseases or challenges?
Yeah, I mean, that obviously varies from person to person, but in general, you can say that a lot of users do experience that cannabis help soothing physical conditions like pain, but also mental conditions like overthinking, depressive thinking, thoughts from anxiety, those with PTSD, report less flashbacks, unpleasant memories. Unpleasant memories obviously is something also that can occur when you have anxiety or suffer from depression, that you relive painful moments in your life, and that cannabis use can help. It creates a state of mind that maybe creates some distance from painful memories or experiences. And obviously, anxiety and depression and also PTSD can come with a lot of physical side effects as well, like pain, like nausea, headache, some nerve conditions, so on and so forth. And that when you're affected by cannabis, especially THC, you can find that cannabis does soothe painful physical conditions.
All right, and this is like for friends, users that I talk to, this is like very like relatable. Many people would say that this is they can relate to what you're just saying. So there's like officially medicalized cannabis as well. Is it used in the same purposes?
Yes, I mean in Norway it's very strict. The rules are very strict for you to get a Norwegian prescription here in Norway. Some chronic pain diseases qualify if you have tried every other available medicine without desired effect. I know cancer patients can get it on prescription as well, but the process is long. You have Shabana Rahman, who has a famous Norwegian who's diagnosed with cancer. She recently stated that she was not allowed to get a prescription for medicinal cannabis. So it's very hard to acquire it. Some forms of epilepsy do qualify, but mostly CBD based medicine. And you have MS and some other conditions that I can't really remember right now. But in short, the cannabis patients who get the prescription in Norway are few, and it's very hard and expensive to get it.
Okay, what is Normal's thought about this? Because from what I read, in countries now we see that there's more and more legalization, and where cannabis is legalized, you see that the use of medicine tend to drop. So, and it would seem like it would be better with some kind of natural medicine like this. And a lot of people that Chemfriendly are in contact with use cannabis. As I said, it's a queer population. You have a lot of PTSD, especially among trans people. You have a lot of anxiety, depressions, and people risk getting problem with the police, with their workplace, if they're health professionals, because they can't get this medication legally, cannabis legally. So how do you work with this in Normal?
Well, we have different perspectives, but our main opinion is that obviously the politics surrounding cannabis in Norway as of now are failing and have failed for quite some time. We do want to see cannabis being legalized in a sensible way here in Norway. We do want the government to seriously make available medicinal cannabis to patients that want it within affordable measures, because it's really expensive as of now and it's hard to get a hold of. So the supply or availability of medicinal cannabis in Norway is horrible at this moment, and those that don't get it in Norway, they travel to other countries to get a prescription there, and they bring a legal amount back home, but that also is very expensive. So obviously we need to make it more available for patients, and as you said, there's a lot of people self-medicating with cannabis in Norway, or are reporting to do so, because the availability of medicinal cannabis is so short. So the reality for most is that they have to get their cannabis from the illegal market. and that presents many problems. As you say, they risk getting into trouble with the law. They are breaking the law to acquire something they feel is medicine for them, which in itself is not right. And also, when you self-medicate, when you self-medicate illegally, you never know what you're getting. You never know what kind of cannabis you're using. Let's take an example. Many people do associate maybe cannabis with high levels of THC, which is the famous component in cannabis that makes you high. It has the drug effect. Many associate that with anxiety. And it's true for some. High doses of THC can induce a little bit of anxiety, nervousness, etc. So maybe a person who is prone for anxiety should not be using cannabis with high levels of THC. But the reality today is that high levels of THC is maybe one of the most common variants on the illicit drug market today. And neuroscience have actually shown that people who have anxiety problems, when they use cannabis who has higher levels of CBD, that's the component that counteracts the effects of THC in cannabis. Higher doses of CBD actually soothes anxiety. So people who use cannabis for anxiety should maybe take cannabis products with higher levels of CBD. And that's something that's really hard to do when you're getting it illegally, because you never know what type of cannabis you're getting. Also, there could be other substances or other materials, I don't know how to say it, in the cannabis that has nothing to do with the plant, but maybe it's gotten into the plant through cultivating processes that are unregulated. So it presents quite a few problems, obviously, for those who self-medicate. And I forgot to mention one thing that's also very important to mention is that when you get the prescription for medicinal cannabis in Norway, if the government finds out, your doctor finds out, you could be a risk of losing your driver's license, because the authorities, they base their science on outdated science when it comes to how cannabis affects you while driving. The studies are very clear that nobody should drive while intoxicated or high, but after some hours, most people are fine to drive after using cannabis. But the authorities, as of now, don't agree with that because they haven't updated their knowledge. So that's a big problem. And I've spoken to people who've contacted me who's told me that they have gone from using strong addictive opioids over a longer period of time that made them depressed, constipated, quality of life was not good. And then they got a legal prescription actually here in Norway, and they felt so much better after a short time when they switched from opioids to cannabis. But then they lost their driver's license, and again that made them depressed, and quality of life started to sink. So that's also a big problem that we know is important to address in these circumstances.
Yeah, so there's like different forms of risk here. It's the risk that you can get from buying the cannabis illegally. You don't know what's in it. It can be more THC, which can promote like anxieties and emotions you don't want. And then it's the risks when it comes to breaking the law, but also actually if you get illegal, but wouldn't that also be in effect with illegal cannabis? Like you can take it in the evening and the psychoactive effect is 6 hours. So you basically can go to work or drive the next day, but still if you can risk losing your driver's license or health license and stuff like that. This is actually a problem we have now with some users who have been punished by taking contact with rehabilitation services. They're punished because they're honest, and the rehabilitation services think, like you explained, that because you have THC in your urine or blood, then they want to take away your driver's license, even though they're not psychoactively high on work. So,
Yeah.
but let's go back to cannabis mental health. So there's obviously a lot of positive effects for users when it comes to PTSD, anxiety, ADHD, depressions. This is very this is information that also users tell us in ChemFriendly. But is there some risks when it comes to self-medicating? I think self-medicating on different drugs, I think, is a valid choice to do. But if you are like me, for example, you come from a complicated background with which gives me a constant internal judge saying that something is always wrong. I'm always walking around with constant worrying, and then I get tired of this constant worrying. Then cannabis would be like it would be like something that I would like to do a lot because it takes away all this. Is there then a risk of addiction, for example?
Obviously, there is a risk of addiction. As I said, 1 in 10 that tries cannabis do get addicted, and people experience that form of addiction in various ways. The definition is that if you're addicted if you try to quit and you find it really hard to quit. Some have some withdrawal symptoms when they try to quit, like headache, night sweats, irritability, loss of sleep. Those are usually not very long lasting, but it can be really unpleasant, especially when you're lacking sleep. It can be dangerous. Obviously, if you're prone to anxiety or depression on top of that, it can be a really bad formula. I have to also state that not everybody who uses cannabis every day is addicted. Even the Norwegian health officials state that. So that's important to get out. But obviously, yeah. I mean, if as I said, if you experience some difficult side effects when using high-level, high THC cannabis, such as nervousness, slight paranoia, etc., it can be unpleasant and something you want to avoid. Now I feel like I've talked a lot of negative about cannabis that contains high levels of THC. I have to also state that a lot of users swear to it, especially those with chronic pain, and there are a lot of users who handle it, and that's what they want. But for some patients, maybe a more mellow effect is what you would recommend. And also, when you talk about self-medicating, I'm not a doctor, but I've spoken to a lot of doctors about this. And the problems with self-medicating is obviously it's going to be the dosage. Like you don't know, or maybe the dosages vary from day to day or from different periods in your life. I can personally relate to what you said, that when you feel bad and you use cannabis to feel better, you use more cannabis in times when you feel worse. So it can spiral into maybe overuse, in lack of a better word. And I feel like it's important, if you're self-medicating, to focus on your life as a whole. I mean, cannabis is not a magic cure that cures everything. If you suffer from anxiety or depression, PTSD, you need to try to fill your life with some meaningful activities. Seek some therapy if you can do that. I know that being open with therapists about illicit drug use is something that most people are afraid of, with good reasons. But to talk to a professional if you're suffering from serious mental or physical health problems is what I would recommend still. And then you choose what kind of information you want to share. So yeah, there are quite a few risks. I also have to state something that I did not know until recently. When the debate about legalization is going on in society, those who are against legalization, they like to bring up that cannabis can trigger psychosis in some people, and that is true. It can trigger psychosis in those who have underlying issues with they maybe have unknown unknown mental health problems that can cause psychosis, like schizophrenia, for example. And again, high levels of THC can do that. But I also have to state that the risk isn't very high. It's I think it's 1%, 1 to 2% risk of someone getting into a psychosis from using cannabis. But if you have PTSD, especially from childhood, or to put it in another way, because I feel like I'm a little bit out of my depth. I'm not a healthcare professional or a psychiatrist, but I know that those who have schizophrenia usually have a lot of the same background as someone with PTSD. It can be very similar, like having severe childhood trauma, for example, experiencing severe or serious bullying in school, etc., can be some things to be aware of when you start to experiment with drug use. To just know that you should be careful if that's maybe a past you have.
I think like if you have some traumas, then stability is important. And I think no matter what drugs it is, it kind of the psychoactive effect upsets your modus operandi. You know, so it can be perceived as a little bit unstable, and therefore you should maybe just try it in safe environments first. But yeah, so you were talking about, you know, if you have problems, mental issues that make it cannabis something that you would like to do because it helps you, then that can bring a risk of addiction. I would like to just throw in that there is a valid point in that there's a difference between functional and dysfunctional addiction. I mean, if you obviously are addicted to cannabis because you can go to work because you take it, then you're functioning because of something you're addicted to. But I also like what you pointed out as kind of like mental harm reduction when it comes to cannabis. And you also write this in your article, which everyone can find on our webpage, chemfriendly.no, about what you said, meaningful activities, friends, go to therapy. And again, I would, as Chemfriendly COB, I would recommend private psychologists instead of public, because we only have bad experiences with the public as of now. But then there's a money issue, which is a problem, of course. But what can you tell me about the 1 in 10 who get addicted? Who are they? What do we know about them?
Well, I think that it's not very easy to define that group, but I think if you're susceptible or prone to get addicted to cannabis, I feel like it's many of the same variables and factors that can make any person addicted to a drug. So again, mental problems or physical problems can be a reason. It is possible to get addicted to cannabis without having any of those clear risk factors, but the majority, I think, is those who are vulnerable to get addicted to any other drug, I think. And again, it goes with underlying vulnerabilities that can be mental, they can be physical, they can be caused by genetics. You never really know. It can obviously be triggered by bad life experience, trauma, a bad period in your life. I think a lot of people can be vulnerable to get addicted to any drug, given if you suffered a loss or a breakup, even like if you're suffering in that way. So there are a lot of different factors. I would encourage people to maybe in a healthy and objective way try to investigate their use, their life, and again try to fill your life with good and meaningful activities. And what I would also like to say, maybe bring it a little bit back to those who self-medicate and are susceptible for mental problems or suffer from mental problems, is that sleep is really important. Try to have a steady sleep pattern, and if you're struggling to have a steady sleep pattern, you should talk to someone on how to do that, because sleep is really important, no matter who you are.
I love that. And again, you write this also very good in the article. Just to say, when you say investigate your own use of cannabis to evaluate if it's a good use or an constructive use, what should you look after?
Yeah, I mean, and I also, when talking about this, I feel like I'm in not the deep water, but I don't want to judge anyone's drug use. But if you feel like your cannabis use is taking over or taking the place of other meaningful things you have done in your life, like hobbies, for example, or socializing, or disrupting your routine throughout the day or the night, I think it's good to try to investigate and see how it's affecting your life. But then again, people who suffer from severe depression or anxiety or PTSD, they tend to self-isolate. That's a symptom in itself. So don't judge yourself if you feel like that's the path you're going down. Just be aware. That's what I would say. Be aware of what's going on. Yeah.
Well, that's always a good advice, I think, to all drug users who are struggling, is that don't go around and whip yourself and punish yourself, which is very easy. So just one last question before I want to go over to cannabis and sexual help. So you write in the article that a lot of cannabis users are not comfortable at talking to treatment personnel or doctors and others about self-medicating on cannabis. So what's Normal's experiences when it comes to how cannabis users and people who suffer with mental health are met by society, friends, or like health professionals talking about cannabis as a self-medication?
Yeah, well, we actually did a study last year on how the pandemic affected cannabis users, both those who use it for medicinal reasons and adult use of cannabis. And you can find that survey on our webpage, normalnorge.no. Well, I would say a lot of people who use cannabis are afraid to be open about this with their physician, with their doctor, with their psychologist, for example. And the reasons for that are, well, those are individual, but in general, a lot of people are afraid there will be some consequences of that openness that will affect them badly, such as losing your driver's license. Like if I go to my doctor and I say to him that I suffer from anxiety and I use cannabis every day, that doctor could report me to the other medical authorities, who then would say that, okay, but you have to quit using cannabis and you have to take urine samples tests to prove that you have quit before you can be allowed to drive again. And I know this is also very common if you're seeking treatment for drug addiction, is that if you seek help for drug addiction, you can temporarily lose your right to drive a car. Young people are afraid that they will not be able to get their certificate, driver's license, or get it postponed because they have used cannabis. And also I have to talk about the stigma that I think in society still is very real when it comes to using cannabis. Cannabis users are affected by stigma. Maybe among the younger populations, this is slowly going away, but the young generation are still not in charge in society. So the rules and the law and the social norms are still based on stigmatizing cannabis users. We do have a news report coming out this week about some dancers in the official ballet team in Norway. I don't know if they've used cannabis, but I know that they have used illicit drugs. And as I've understood it, the article was behind a payment wall, so I haven't read the whole thing, but the leader of the Norwegian ballet is furious, and she has clearly stated that there will be consequences for those dancers, and that using illicit drugs is not in line with the values of the Norwegian ballet. So that's just a small example of how the stigma is still affecting people's work life, for example. Because the leader of the Norwegian ballet also stated that those dancers who are suspected of using illicit drugs they weren't any less talented before this news broke, but now she feels like there has to be some consequences. If they lose their job, I'm not sure, but again, it's proof that cannabis use and openness about it, or illicit drug use, openness about it, can have serious consequences, unfortunately.
Yeah, and losing your driver's license or right to work is, well, then you have a lot of time to sit and feel sorry for yourself and do drugs, I guess. So I'm not exactly sure if it helps or make a problem worse.
Yeah.
But okay, so thank you for that, André. Again, I would encourage everyone to read André's article on cannabis and mental health at COB. And now we're going to talk a little bit about cannabis and sexual health, which I think is very interesting. I'm very glad that you also wrote this article for us. Again, you know, cannabis is the most used illegal drug. It's certainly popular among queer people. And I don't think that queers and straights are any different when it comes to that sexuality is important to us. So it doesn't surprise anyone that cannabis is also used by sex for some. There are a few studies that's done on this, and I just want to read up on what I found earlier today. That, for example, some men report that their sexual performance improves when they use marijuana, while others may experience problems such as less motivation for sex, erectile dysfunction, trouble getting orgasm, or premature ejection. And then there was another study where 58% of men reported that the quality of their orgasm increased with cannabis, and 32% of women said the same. And another study found that people who reported using cannabis monthly, weekly, or daily also reported slightly more frequent sex than those who never smoked. And there were like few major findings, like people who reported ever using cannabis prior to sex were more likely to report having satisfying orgasms than those who did not use cannabis before sex. But then there's other studies which people report different results. As I said, some people can have more anxiety using cannabis and sex, and having a hard time getting orgasms. So the studies are a little bit here and there, but there are some things to say that cannabis can improve people's sex life. So from your perspective, from Normal's perspective, who is it that mixes cannabis and sex?
I think that's a wide variety of individuals. I would in general say that those who use cannabis frequently or not frequently sometimes, so it's hard to define those individuals as one group. I would say cannabis users who also have sex.
Good answer. You write a little bit in the article about like the cultural approach to it. Do you know anything about like different subcultures? You have music cultures, artist cultures, where queer cultures, where you know, cannabis has like this special role as a special drug that defines that little community. Do you know? Have you had any reflections around different subcultures and how they relate to cannabis as like an aphrodisiac?
Yeah, I think a lot of cultures do, and maybe there is something maybe based on some cultural myths on the qualities well, the effects on how cannabis affects you as an individual. I think it comes from different music cultures and different cultures around the world. Also, I think one of these myths, I'm not saying they're false or true, but especially this one that I'm mentioning now was based on those who wanted to make cannabis illegal in the United States and around the world several decades ago, who came with some very horrible racist false facts on how cannabis especially affected white women. Harry Anslinger, one of the most famous people who created the war on drugs, stated that cannabis made white women have sex with people of color to scare the broad population on the effects on cannabis. So some of these myths come from different cultures, but I think also some of them stem from the war on drugs and those racist undertones that war is built upon.
Oh, thank you. That's interesting.
And also the hippie culture. I have to say, the hippie culture also had a reputation of being open and sexually active, and also frequent users of cannabis. So that's in recent times a culture that's known for it. Yeah.
Perfect. Thank you. Esther, I just want to throw the same question to you. You're in Normal as well. You may be talking to a different kind of Normal users than André. What type of women do cannabis and sex?
I mean, well, now I wish I read André's article, and I wish I had time to prepare for this event. I was dragged into this kind of last minute. But I think you asked if there are certain subcultures that mix cannabis and sex. I don't know, and I don't think cannabis and sex has been like a major topic in the cannabis movement, really. I think we have to take self-criticism on that and maybe investigate this topic a bit more. But I think I agree with André. I mean, cannabis users, they also have sex usually. And so it's very difficult to say that certain people like to mix cannabis and sex. I have read some article that says cannabis can help enhance the sexual experience. And I also read some articles that says it can decrease the experience. So I think it's very individual. For some people it works, and for some people it doesn't.
Yeah, but it was interesting though, from one of the studies I read, when 58% of men in the study reported that, and I'm guessing that it's mostly cis men, as in non-trans men, cis women, trans women, but that 58% of the men said that cannabis increased the quality of orgasms, but only 32% of women said the same, but men and women agreed in about the same amount that cannabis increased their desire for a familiar partner, 50% for men and 60% for women. Increased sexual pleasure and satisfaction, 70% of men and 76% of women. And improved the sensation of touching, 59% of men and 57% of women. And in additionally, only 34% of men said that cannabis increased snuggling, but 56% of women said that it did. So do you have like any like ideas of what the gender gap here in some of the numbers?
Oh, I don't know, but I could say that, I mean, doing cannabis or other kinds of drugs as MDMA or LSD. Just hold on. Sorry. Like I warned you about before, I have some kids around. No, I mean, it can make you, drug use, it can make you vulnerable. And usually you have a better experience of doing drugs if you do it with someone you're comfortable with. And I don't know, maybe for women that is even more important. So you could say, I mean, I read some studies about MDMA and relationships and sexual experiences. And that said that if you have a sexual experience with someone you know very well, it can be a very intimate thing. It can be something that can bring two people very close. But if you have that same experience with someone you don't know or someone you don't have that same kind of same level of relationship with, you can have a very bad experience because you can maybe not communicate your boundaries the same way. So I think that is very important when we talk about cannabis and sex, and also sex and other drugs. You have to be with someone you know will respect your boundaries, someone you can relax with in order to have a good experience. That is my advice.
I think that's a very good harm reduction advice, and interesting what you say, that there may be for some in general a difference in men and women's need for security and safety, and that can maybe explain some of the differences in the numbers. That's interesting to reflect on. But what you ended by talking of Esther, André also mentions in his article, Cannabis, Eroticism and Sexuality, about cannabis and communication, and that cannabis can make it harder to communicate. So to both of you, Andreas first, and then Esther, you mentioned it a little bit, Esther, but what should people mixing cannabis and sex think about when it comes to communication and consent?
Well, I think communication is key. When you're having a sexual experience, when you're going to have a sexual experience with each other. And obviously, I feel like most people in general, whether they use drugs or not, most people, maybe they have sex the first time they have taken alcohol. That's the broader population, and maybe alcohol and cannabis. And it happens spontaneously after a night out, maybe. Okay, so communicating on beforehand, I think it's not that very common to communicate like your boundaries, what your wants, your needs. And I suspect that Norwegians in general are pretty bad at this, even in relationships, because we tend to avoid those conversations. Obviously, people vary in that sort of openness. But I think that cannabis users, especially, or when you mix cannabis with sexual experiences, I think communicating maybe before you take the cannabis, before you use the cannabis, so you lay out maybe some ground rules. I don't know what you're about to, kind of experience you're about to share with each other. Some experiences require more communication on boundaries, safe words, etc. But just to communicate what you like, what you don't like, also I think is very important. And I think it's important to agree that it's okay to give feedback during also. I feel like this is also something that a lot of couples and people in general should practice a lot more. Communicate what you like and don't like, because I know that a lot of people, myself included, sometimes you don't want to state that you don't want to hurt someone's feelings, for example, or give corrections during. It can make it awkward, right? But if you use cannabis, some people can experience a little bit of overthinking, like and some conversations can be even more awkward to have while you're using cannabis, because, as I said, high levels of THC can create some nervousness, can create some tendencies to overthink, slight anxiety, etc. So I think that's factors that are important to keep in mind, and also to be open to receive the same level of feedback, constructive criticism or encouragement to, you know, do what the other person likes or don't like. Yeah.
Thanks, that's awesome.
Not do what they don't like, but don't do what they don't like. Yeah.
That's always a good advice. Esther, you want to bring in something to that?
Yeah, just one more. Sorry, can you repeat the question?
Yeah, just what should people mixing cannabis and sex think about when it comes to communication and consent?
Yeah, yeah, I agree with everything André said, really. But I also think, I mean, we tend to also focus a lot on the negative here, and I don't want us to, you know, completely fall into that trap. Because I do think that cannabis can also help communication. I mean, like André said, it can create anxiety, but it can also kind of take you outside your own mind, and it can make it actually easier to have conversations that would maybe be awkward if you weren't affected by cannabis. So I do think that, like I stated before, in a safe relationship, it can actually be a given experience and something positive. And I think when we talk about drugs, we tend to over focus on the bad things, but we have to accept that for a lot of people it is, I mean, that's why people use drugs, and that's why people use cannabis, because it gives them a good experience, and maybe an experience that they wouldn't have without that use. So yeah, bottom line is it can be a good thing for couples to do and to try, I think.
I'm so happy that we dragged you into this in the last minute. I love that. And I'm totally agree with the last point. Like Chemfriendly, we work to fight against overdoses, rape, and sexualized drug use and all that. But we are Chemfriendly.
Yeah.
Like, we want people to have an awesome time with at least amount of risk. So totally agree with that. And very important what you said, that I really think it's important what you said, André, that we should develop a better culture when it comes to communicating sexuality, which also means to give feedback in a way without being an asshole, but also to be able to accept feedback without having a fragile ego. Like, we need this culture. But also, it's very important what you said, Esther, that cannabis can help with this, which we also know from other types of drugs. For example, the Australian philosopher Kane Race wrote about MDMA and how he meant that MDMA helped queer men fight AIDS in the 1980s and 90s, because it made it safer for people to share harm reduction advice when it came to HIV prevention. So love that. But also interesting what you said, André, about cannabis can make, how can cannabis influence your ability to regulate your own emotions? Like, sex isn't always fun. It can be a little bit scary or something like this. Can cannabis help you deal in a better way, as Esther suggests, or can it also be, you know, make it even more frightening?
I'm going to try to lay out my train of thought here, and just to begin with the fact that when you asked me to write this article, I was very intrigued, but also a little bit scared, because as Asta said, we haven't really focused on these two concepts together in Normal, and we should do more of it in the future. Also, when you ask me as a straight white cis male, I feel a responsibility when talking about sex and cannabis use to talk about those risk factors. How, for example, cannabis can affect you in a serious situation where your fight, flight, or freeze mode kicks in. And I think that's important to communicate, but also, as Esther said, there is a reason why people prefer to use cannabis when they're having sexual experiences. And as I said in the article, also part of experimenting is losing control in a healthy way, because when you're experimenting, you don't know the outcome necessarily, and this is about people who experiment with cannabis and sex. And they have to find their own conclusions, but in order to do so, they have to try it. And obviously, that sense of liberating, euphoric feeling that cannabis can create can obviously create wonderful feelings of excitement, arousal, and I think it's also important to keep in mind that when you're very aroused, just notice how your partner is doing as well, because obviously cannabis can really induce that feeling of sexual desire, and I'm not going to speculate too hard on that fact. It said that 60% of men said that it bettered their orgasms, and only 30% of women said the same thing. Maybe
in one study out of many.
Yeah. Maybe those 30% lacking are having sex with men who need to pay more attention or ask for feedback. We simply don't know, right? So, but I'm glad we're getting into how cannabis can be a positive drug combining with sex. And as I said, it can increase your emotions, also those that are pleasant. So yeah, people just need to find out for themselves.
Yeah, I like that. And also just to say that when it comes to insecurities and stuff like that, because some people find that it may be a little bit unnatural to ask their partner how they're doing and feedback things. But like, for example, if you're the penetrating partner and you're afraid of, like, you don't want to get feedback that you're hurting someone, if you ask, then you'll relax more because you always know where the other person is. So it can make that you relax more and have better sex. And I think like the harm reduction advices that we've gone into here, like, for example, when it comes to mental health, look at your life holistically. Do you have meaningful activities, friends, a therapist you can go to? Evaluate your drug use. Does my cannabis use compete with other meaningful activities? Meaning that cannabis can also be meaningful in itself. And also when it comes to sexuality, talk to each other, know how cannabis affects you. So it's, if you're mixing cannabis and sex, then it's good to know that you can get easily anxiety on cannabis, for example, and communication. We're rounding up 1 hour. I think maybe Chemfriendly is going to ask Esther to write the Cannabis and Sex 2 article. I think this has been awesome. You said that you haven't talked about cannabis and sex that much in Normal. I'm proud that we are nudging you in that position. I would recommend everyone to read the awesome articles of André on cannabis and mental health and cannabis and sex on Chemfriendly.no. Check out Chemfriendly.no. Check out Normal. Is it normal.no?
Normalnorge.no.
Normalnorge.no. And if you like Chemfriendly and Normal's work, then become members. We both need members. And thank you so much to Sondre for presenting Helseutvalgets Sjekkpunkt and Arena. Thank you so much, André, for your participating. And Esther, thank you for jumping into this in the last minute. That it made the conversation.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, Andrés, for taking us through this evening.
And thank you to our viewers, and have a good evening.